Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Tim, and today we're going to discuss a topic that seems to be on a lot of people's minds and has been for the last several years, and that is gun control. Now, this topic tends to lead to some pretty heated debates, so I'm expecting a lot of you will probably disagree with what I have to say. Others will agree. Please keep the conversation below in the comments civil. Try to act like grown-ups. But please comment. I strongly encourage that. Comment, share, whatever. Even if your opinion differs from mine, I want to hear what you have to say. So, let's get down to it. Now, just to start off, I want to let you know that I take, or my opinion is, leans left. I am a liberal. I am very proud of that fact. So, I support common sense gun laws. I believe very much that our current gun regulations are in dire need of reform because they aren't working. I live in Oregon. I grew up in Oregon. I live in Portland now, but originally I'm from the Oregon coast, a pretty small town where a pretty large portion of the population owns guns, and they're hunters and stuff like that. Most of my family hunts and owns guns and things, so they disagree with my views on a lot of this. I have never been interested in guns. I mean, my dad taught me to shoot when I was a kid, and I was good at it, and just shooting at targets or whatever. I enjoyed that. I mean, I didn't really see anything wrong with it. We were very safe about it. My dad taught my brother and I how to properly handle the guns and how to be safe about them. And I know growing up, my dad always had a few guns. He wasn't a real big hunter or anything. He occasionally would go hunting, but it wasn't something he was like really interested in. But he always did have, 2 or 3 guns. And he didn't keep them locked up. They were just, sort of stuffed to the back of his closet in the bedroom. But I don't remember my brother and I ever even being tempted to play with the guns or anything like that. So, yeah, it probably would have been better, more responsible for him to keep the guns locked up when my brother and I were really young. But at the very least, he taught us that they weren't toys. They weren't something that we could play with, and we always knew that. And, so we never did. Now, my brother and I ended up being complete opposites when it comes to guns. My brother has been in the Army for like 17 years. My brother is really into hunting. He's pretty much, I would say, passionate about it. He has been since he was a teenager. Me, on the other hand, never had any desire to hunt. I love animals and stuff. I mean, I'm not a vegetarian or anything. I do eat meat, but I could never bring myself to kill an animal, personally. I didn't judge other people for it, if they were into hunting or whatever. I didn't necessarily agree with it all the time because, like I said, I come from a family of hunters, and none of them needed to hunt. I mean, it was always just sport for them. They didn't need the food. I mean, yeah, they would eat a lot of what they killed, but most of it just got thrown away. It got put in a freezer. They'd give a lot of meat away. They'd eat some of it. The rest would go in the freezer, and that's where it would stay until a year later when hunting season rolled around again, and then all that would get thrown out to make room for their new kills. So, yeah, a lot of it went to waste. I know a lot of hunters that, you know, they say, oh, well, I eat what I kill and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, okay, I don't know very many hunters that actually eat everything that they kill, you know. And I don't know very many that need that meat, you know, from hunting. Basically, they do it for sport. They may enjoy the meat, they may eat a little bit of it. But that's not why they're hunting. So I've never really agreed with that. I've never really agreed with hunting for sport. To me, it's like, you know, animals are living creatures. They have feelings. They, whatever. To me, it just seems cruel to kill them for pleasure. You know, to me, it's something wrong with your brain if you think you need to kill something for entertainment. You know, I don't know. I don't get it. But again, I don't really judge. You know, I grew up around hunters and everything. I know they're not bad people, so I don't judge them for it, you know. And I don't lecture them or, you know, criticize them for it. I mean, I know that's who they are, and we may not agree, but whatever, you know. I mean, I accept that our differences. Anyway, moving on from that a little bit. So a lot of these gun control arguments that I hear are people are saying, oh, but Second Amendment rights, Constitution says we can have guns, so government just needs to shut up and let us have our guns. Okay, yeah, I understand that the Second Amendment says that you have the right to keep and bear arms, and that right shall not be infringed. Fine, but I think that it's important that we consider the time in which the Second Amendment was written. It was written in the late 1700s, early 1800s. I'm not exactly sure of the exact date, but around that time period. Anyway, we had just recently fought a war on American soil to earn our independence, right? Yeah, I think most people are pretty aware of that period of history. And that war, we didn't have like a well-formed military at that point in time. We had, you know, a Confederate army, but the war was mostly fought by the state militias. The militias were just regular citizens who had arms, very little training, if any at all. And yes, that was our militant force at that point in time. And also, this was a war being fought literally in our streets, in people's front yards and stuff. I mean, you know, we weren't a very industrialized, well-developed country at that point in time, so a lot of the land was more rural. People lived in rural areas. A lot more people had farms and stuff like that. They grew their own food and whatnot, you know. So anyway, it was very important that citizens have guns at that point in time, because for one, they might have to defend themselves against the British soldiers during the Revolutionary War. But even after the war, just, you know, when there wasn't still a war being fought on American soil, regular citizens still needed guns. A lot of them still had to hunt for food. I mean, you know, supermarkets didn't exist back then. Like I said, a lot of people lived in like farms, rural areas, whatever. They weren't near towns or cities where they could go and find, you know, go to a deli or a butcher and buy their meat, or go to, you know, a general store and buy their produce and things like that. You know, they kind of had to fend for themselves. Now, yeah, there were those stores in the delis and stuff like that in the cities and towns, but like I said, most people, or a lot of people at least, lived in rural areas. Even people that lived fairly close to towns and cities, they didn't have cars back then. You know, they had to travel on horseback, which meant, you know, going to the store was not an easy task. You know, you had to saddle up the horse and all that, and, you know, like I said, sometimes it was a 1 or 2 day journey to get to the nearest store or whatever. So it was very different. A lot of them had to hunt for food, and they also had to grow their own food. They had to protect their crops and their gardens from wild animals. So again, they needed guns for that. And like I said, the big thing though is that we had just fought a war on American soil. So yeah, of course everybody needed a gun. It was necessary for protection. I mean, there was still, even after the war, we were a very young country. We still didn't have a very powerful military or anything. We were, very weak compared to what we are today. So yeah, we were susceptible to invasion. If another country decided to invade us, we didn't have a whole lot of power to defend ourselves. We didn't have the powerful military that we have today. So anyway, yes, guns were much more necessary. They also weren't very powerful. They had, muskets and stuff like that. You could load one shot at a time, and that was a process. You had to pour in the gunpowder and, drop the ball in the end and, light it, whatever. It took several seconds to load one bullet. And then again, like I said, they weren't very powerful weapons. So yeah, so there's that. You can't really do nearly as much damage with an old musket as you can with, modern day guns. And people back then were also much more responsible when it comes to gun ownership. They respected the power of guns. They respected the deadly nature of guns. And they were very safe and responsible with them. There weren't accidental shootings happening all the time where little kids were accidentally shooting the neighbor kid or, toddlers are killing people left and right these days, not on purpose, but, and that's a direct result of people just not being responsible, not respecting, what guns are. Guns are very, very dangerous. They are meant to wound or kill. That is their sole purpose. Now, granted, some people shoot for sport. They shoot at targets, whatever. Some people compete that way. It's a sporting thing, and that's fine, but that's still not what guns were invented to do. Guns were invented to kill, and we need to respect that more than we do. So yes, back in the 1700s, early 1800s, they definitely respected guns more than we do. And they were a lot more safe with their guns than we are. And guns also weren't used for crime in the way that they are today. Yes, of course they were occasionally used to commit crimes back then, whatever. But they weren't used the way that they are today. Today, guns are definitely the weapon of choice for criminals. And if you think about it, it's because criminals tend to be cowards. I've known quite a few criminals. I've never been a violent person, and I've never really liked guns or anything like that. But I was a criminal in the past. I don't deny it. I turned my life around years ago. But I've committed crimes. There's no hiding that fact. But yes, I know criminals, and I know that they're pretty cowardly. And that's why guns are their weapon of choice, because guns give them power and control over others. Psychologically, that's significant. The feeling that a gun gives you is significant, and I think it's very important that we recognize the psychology behind it. With a gun in your hand, you have the power of life and death. You can snuff out a life instantly if you want to. You can control everyone around you. You can force everyone to do what you want them to do. So that's why criminals prefer using guns to commit crimes. You know, without a gun, do you think somebody would be as willing to rob a convenience store or even a bank? You know, you don't often see successful robberies happening where the criminal is wielding a knife or a bat or a taser or something. You know, I mean, you just don't see that happen all that often. Sometimes they attempt it, sure. I mean, I'm not going to claim that they don't, because they do. Sometimes they don't use guns, they use something else. But usually when they try to use some other thing like a bat or a knife or whatever, they aren't successful in their robbery goals or whatever. But with guns, they almost always are, because there's no match for a gun, really. You know, you go into a convenience store, the only match for a gun is another gun. So, I mean, maybe if the clerk has a gun, you know, you may not get away with it, but, you know, but that doesn't mean that more guns or arming citizens is going to make the world a safer place either. It actually, if you look at all of the research done on that, it pretty much proves that more guns equals more gun violence, not less. Anyway, so, but back to the criminals. It's their weapon of choice because of the power that it gives them and how it affects them psychologically. So yeah. Anyway, moving on to the good guy with a gun versus bad guy with a gun debate. Now, I understand why that simple idea seems to make so much sense to people, you know, mostly gun owners and gun fanatics and things like that. You know, you think about the reasoning to that argument, and it's like, oh, okay, well, yeah, if there's a bad guy with a gun, then this good guy over here, if he has a gun, he can take out the bad guy before the bad guy hurts a bunch of people. Yeah, okay, yeah, in theory. But in reality, it doesn't usually work out that way. It has. I mean, there have been a few cases where somebody, some bad guy with a gun, came into some public place, pulled out their gun and started threatening people, and an armed civilian that happened to be there was able to take out the bad guy before the bad guy could kill anybody, or before the bad guy could hurt a lot of people. Maybe they shot one or two people, but maybe they would have shot more if the good guy hadn't shot him, or whatever. You know, it has happened. But all the studies and the statistics show that most of the time, when there is a good guy with a gun involved in the incident, it actually makes things worse, because that good guy isn't trained in how to handle a situation like that properly. They just are trying to be a hero. They're trying to be sort of a Rambo type. You know, I've got my gun, I'm going to take out this bad guy and save the day. Well, yeah, again, usually that leads to either the good guy shooting the wrong person, which has happened, or it actually provokes the bad guy. You know, let's say the bad guy comes in and is threatening a bunch of people with a gun. Well, there's no guarantee that he's actually going to shoot anybody. A lot of these criminals, again, are cowards, and they're too cowardly to actually shoot people. They are just using the gun for intimidation. They want to scare people. So say they come in waving a gun around, maybe they don't intend to shoot anybody, but somebody else that's there pulls out a gun, you know, this good guy hero type pulls out a gun and starts shooting. Chances are the bad guy's going to start shooting back, and bullets are going to be flying everywhere, and people are going to get hurt. You know, and that's what happens 9 times out of 10 when a good guy tries to save the day. A lot of times it just doesn't work. Most of the time, actually, when a bad guy with a gun gets taken out by civilians, they're taken out by unarmed civilians. They're tackled or something. Somebody is able to do something to subdue them or take them down or whatever without having to use a gun. So, and that's in cases where people tried to take out a shooter when they were unarmed themselves. Those cases have been more successful than the whole good guy with a gun scenarios. Like I said, occasionally a good guy with a gun actually prevents a serious tragedy, and that's fine. But like I said, more often than not, the largest percentage of the time, the good guy with a gun only makes things worse. So that argument just doesn't really fly with me, because there's no truth to it. You know, I mean, I understand why people would think that, you know, because like I said, the logic is, oh, well, you know, this person has a gun, then they can take out the bad guy. Well, again, like I said, yeah, I get the logic to that, I get the reasoning there, but that's just not the reality. It doesn't work out that way most of the time. So yeah, I don't really like that argument either. And then, okay, the next argument that I hear a lot is that we need guns to protect ourselves from a tyrannical government, which again is in the Constitution. You know, we have a constitutional right to defend ourselves against a tyrannical government should the need for that ever arise. And so a lot of people argue, oh, well, we need our guns for that. You know, they say, oh, they're trying to take our guns right now so that they can weaken us so that we can't fight back. And then they're going to come in and, you know, basically force us into submission, you know, enslave us, or, you know, just oppress us in some way. I'm sorry, but that argument is fucking ridiculous. You know, I mean, seriously, like, you seriously think that the American government is one day going to just say, okay, America is no longer free at all, so we're going to come in and we're going to force you to be the kind of people we want you to be. We're going to force you to do the work we want you to do, to believe what we want you to believe, to say what we want you to say, and do what we want you to do, and wear what we want you to wear, and so on and so forth. And even if, I mean, for one thing, the government stands to gain nothing from doing that at all. They rely on the support of the people. They rely on our sort of ignorance a little bit. They rely on our money. They rely on us, you know, just in general. If they were to turn on us like that, they wouldn't have that support anymore. So again, they stand to gain nothing from doing that. They would only be hurting themselves. So, but let's just say hypothetically that they decided one day that that's what they were going to try to do. Do you honestly think that American military, American soldiers, are going to comply with an order to attack their own people? I mean, the motivation behind everything they do as soldiers is to defend our freedom and protect us. So if the government tried to tell them, hey, so you got to turn on your own people now. You got to go to your hometown and just bust in every door, you know, and take away everybody's freedom. You know, they don't have rights anymore. They don't have freedom. No, that's not going to happen. I don't know a single American soldier that would agree to turn on their own people and forcefully overthrow them and oppress them and enslave them or whatever, and, you know, use violent force if the people aren't happy about it. These are their friends and neighbors and families and stuff. These soldiers are not going to turn on us in that way. The government may ask them to someday. I have no idea. I don't think so, because like I said, the government stands to gain nothing from that. But, American soldiers are not going to do that. Now, somebody else brought up the other day on Facebook or whatever, somebody brought up the point that there's some, government agency or military branch or something that on their application, it asks the question, if ordered, would you fire on your own people? And most people say yes on this application. That's the answer they're looking for, is yes. But that's a very vague question. And I don't think it means what this person was trying to claim that it means. I think what it means is, would you fire on other Americans who are a threat to the general public, basically? Because there are American terrorists. We know that. Americans have attacked their own people more often than foreign terrorists have attacked us. So I'm pretty sure that's what that question is referring to. Would you fire on another American if that American was a threat to the public? And of course they're going to say yes. I do not think that question means, would you flat out turn against your own people? Would you go to war against America, the American people? Let's say the government turns on us and it's the American people versus the American government. Would you side with the government or would you side with the people? I don't know a single American soldier that would side with the government in that case. They would most definitely side with the people. And again, even if they didn't, let's say hypothetically, again, that our military decided to side with the government and they tried to, oppress the people, enslave the people, whatever it is you people are imagining is going to happen. Let's just say that happened. How do you think the rest of the world is going to respond to that? Our military may be the most powerful in the world, but that's when comparing it against other single militaries. If 3 or 4 of the other world's superpowers, like let's say Japan, China, Russia, whatever, 3 or 4 of those countries got together, decided to work together, join their military forces together against the American military, we wouldn't stand a chance. So, and a lot of those countries don't like us all that much, and they would lose a lot in, they get a lot of money from the American people. A lot of our products are made in other countries, manufactured in other countries and things like that. Their economies would suffer greatly if the American government decided to enslave all the American people and shit, because we wouldn't be buying their products anymore. We would be enslaved or oppressed or whatever by our own government. So these other countries are not going to want that to happen because they stand to lose if that happens. So chances are they are going to come to the aid of the American people. They would fight, they would team up, they would fight against the American military to protect the American people and their own interests, because their own interests rely on the American people buying their products and shit like that, So, yeah, I don't think that the rest of the world would just sit back and watch and be like, hey, oh, yeah, America's turning into fucking Nazi Germany, whatever. I don't think that they would just sit back and let that happen. I do think that they would oppose the American government and fight on the side of the American people, if that's what it came down to. It's not going to happen though. It's not going to get to that point because, like I said, again, for the third time, our government stands to gain nothing from overthrowing us in that sort of extreme way. So, I mean, I really don't know what kind of tyrannical government you guys are so paranoid is going to happen. I mean, I understand that there are laws that we don't necessarily like, we don't all agree upon. There are definitely times when our rights and freedoms are violated. There's no denying that, and we fight back against it when that happens. But we are not living under a tyrannical government. I mean, if you think we are, then you need to look up the definition of the word tyrannical, because we're still free to live how we want. We're free to believe what we want and practice our beliefs how we want. We're free to dress how we want. We're free to pursue whatever career we want. We're free to start a business and make money and own property and travel and live where we want. We're free to love who we want. We're free to marry who we want. That's not tyranny, I mean, you can't just start screaming tyranny whenever a law is passed that you don't like, or whenever one of your freedoms is limited in some way or regulated in some way. And make no mistake, all of your freedoms are regulated. They have to be, because that's how you keep order. I mean, I've known anarchists before who believe that there should just be no law and people should just be able to do whatever the hell they want. But, unfortunately, as, the human race has not evolved to a point where we can responsibly do that. We can't. We need laws. We need order. We need regulations and stuff. We can have freedoms, but those freedoms can't be unlimited. And by the way, the Second Amendment is not unlimited, like a lot of people seem to claim. The Supreme Court ruled years and years ago that the Second Amendment is not without limits. The government can regulate guns. They cannot ban them. And they're not trying to. All they're trying to do is regulate them to keep some guns out of some of the wrong hands. That's it. Nobody needs a semi-automatic weapon. Nobody needs an automatic weapon. Those things are not necessary. You don't need those for hunting. You don't need them for protection. Again, people say they need them so they can protect themselves from a tyrannical government. Yeah, again, that's just ridiculous and not realistic at all. That's a fantasy. So we're just going to move on from that. You don't need semi-automatic weapons. And in truth, with these mass shootings, incidents involving semi-automatic weapons led to higher numbers of deaths and injuries than mass shootings not involving semi-automatic weapons. There have been mass shootings that just involved, handguns or, a rifle or something, and, just single shot guns. And those were tragic, but they didn't lead to nearly as many deaths or injuries as the incidents involving semi-automatic or automatic weapons. So whatever, but you don't need them for hunting. You don't need them for protection. I could understand maybe wanting to shoot them for sport at like a shooting range or something, and that's fine. But the reality is you don't need weapons that powerful. You just don't. There's no reason for it. You may like them, you may think they're cool or whatever, and that's fine. But, if the government bans them, fine. I'm all for that. Ban semi-automatic weapons by all means. I don't really see the point in people owning them. But I'd also be okay with it if they just regulated them more than other guns. Like, let's say you have to have additional safety training, a special sort of license to own a semi-automatic weapon. Something beyond whatever safety training and licensing you have to have for any other kind of gun. So anyway, improved background checks. To me, that's just common sense. Too many criminals are slipping through the cracks with the background checks because they aren't nearly thorough enough. I know plenty of people who should not own guns, but they do anyway because these background checks just aren't thorough enough. So these people are slipping through the cracks and getting guns very easily, and these people should not be getting guns that easily. That's just what it boils down to. You know, improved background checks or increased background checks are probably going to make the process of buying a gun a little bit less convenient for the responsible, law-abiding citizens. It might take a little bit longer. There might be a little bit more of a wait time before you can actually get your gun in your hands. But who fucking cares if that saves lives? You know, I mean, if you can keep just one gun out of the wrong hands, you know, let's say one person who would end up killing somebody with a gun doesn't get a gun because of the increased background checks, then mission accomplished. You know, it was all worth it because a life was saved. So, whatever. But the fact is, it's going to save a lot of lives. Other countries have proven that with their increased gun safety laws and stuff. I do think there needs to be increased safety requirements. I think people should have to go through classes and stuff. I realize that in some cases they do already, but it's not enough. And I think the proof is all of the gun accidents and all of the irresponsible, stupid crap that a lot of gun owners do. I mean, I know a couple different people who have accidentally shot themselves while cleaning their guns before going hunting or whatever, you know. And so, I mean, that's happening way too often. There's obviously too many people that don't respect gun safety enough or know how to properly handle a gun. So I definitely think there should be more requirements there. I also believe that children do not need guns. I mean, I'm totally for educating them on gun safety and proper gun handling when they're young, but it should be done in a highly controlled and supervised environment without live ammunition. They don't need to be shooting actual bullets. So I do think they should be taught, but I do not think that a child who is considered too irresponsible to decide whether or not they want to smoke cigarettes or drink alcohol or have sex or drive a car or live on their own or any of these things that, you know, we think kids are too irresponsible or too immature to handle at such a young age. I don't think that they need to own guns. I don't think they need to be hunting. You know, I don't think that's okay at all. You know, I mean, I think kids should have to be at least 18 before they are able to purchase or own or possess a gun. They really don't need them at a younger age than that. Like I said, I'm all for teaching them gun safety and stuff, but they don't need to be messing around with guns. I just think there's something fundamentally wrong with that. But again, I was taught to shoot when I was very young. So, but still, I could have just been taught the gun safety and the gun handling without live ammunition, and that would have been just as good. So whatever, you know. So yeah, I think it's very selfish to oppose common sense gun laws because they will save lives. A lot of people like to argue, oh, well, even with increased background checks and even if you ban, you know, certain kinds of guns or whatever, bad guys are still going to get them. I mean, drugs are illegal, but you can still get those, right? Yeah, well, what if meth and heroin were sold in the corner store? You think that's going to help the drug problem? No, it's going to make it worse, like a million times worse. You know, junkies would be dropping dead in the streets from overdoses every time you turn around, you know? Like, no, you don't need to make it easy for them to get them, you know? I mean, I do think that drugs should be decriminalized because that has worked in other areas, and I definitely think that we need to look at drug abuse as, you know, an illness and not criminal. But I don't think that they should just be sold in the corner store. I mean, and I'm not talking about marijuana. You know, pot is, in my opinion, it's not a drug. It's not, doesn't fit into that category at all. But like meth and heroin, no, you don't need to be selling those at the corner store. And if you did, it's definitely not going to make the drug problem worse or better. It's going to make it worse. So yes, some criminals will still be able to get guns no matter what. You know, they'll be able to get them on the streets or whatever. But that doesn't mean we need to make it easy for them. You know, a lot of criminals are getting guns legally. They use the gun show loopholes and stuff where a lot of times you don't even have to show ID at a gun show to buy a gun. You know, I've seen videos where a 13-year-old kid just walks in and buys a gun. May not have been a very high-powered gun, but every gun is deadly. So, you know, he could have bought that gun, went straight home and shot his parents in the fucking face. You know, who knows what he planned on doing with that gun. But yeah, there are the gun show loopholes, and people can get guns online fairly easily. All of these things. That is what allows criminals to get guns legally so easily. We don't need to be doing that. We don't need to be making it easy for them. We need to close these loopholes with the gun shows and everything, for one, and we need increased background checks. Because yes, there are still going to be those criminals out there that are able to get their guns on the streets. They're going to be able to get their hands on them or whatever if they want them bad enough, but not all of them. It's going to prevent some of them from getting their hands on guns. And that's the whole point. That's what it's all about. Nobody's trying to ban your guns. Nobody's trying to take your guns away. Nobody's going to come in your house and take all your guns. All we're trying to do is keep some of them out of the wrong hands. That's it. And that's what increased background checks would do. That's what closing these loopholes would do. It would keep some guns out of some of the wrong hands, and that's great. We need that. It's common sense. So stop bitching about it, because you sound like idiots when you start bitching about gun control. Oh, the government's trying to take my guns. No, they're not. They're trying to keep you safe. I don't understand what's so hard to fucking see about that. You know, it's all about keeping the American people safe. You know, I'm sick of hearing about all these shootings, mass shootings, and everything else. You know, I mean, it's just, yeah. We live in a messed up world, you know. Too many Americans have abused their Second Amendment rights. And so now even the responsible, law-abiding citizens are going to have to deal with the consequences of that. They may not be guilty. They may not have abused their Second Amendment rights. But enough people have that it's a problem for all of us now. And the only way to deal with it is increased gun regulations. That's the only way that we can reduce this problem. It's not going to make it go away, but it can reduce it. You know, whatever. I mean, that's just how it is. So whatever. It's just stop your bitching about the gun control, because like I said, nobody has said. I'm always hearing you right wingers and gun fanatics saying, "Oh, the government's trying to take my guns." Again, no, they're not. So if you're a criminal, or if you have some like severe mental illness that makes you a danger to society or something, then yeah, the government might just take your guns. But if you're a criminal or severely mentally ill, you don't need guns, and you shouldn't have them in the first place. You know, you probably shouldn't even have sharp objects, but, you know, whatever. So, I mean, yeah. Now, finally, the last little thing that I want to talk about real quick is this comparison that I often hear people, you know, gun owners argue, which is more people die in car accidents every year than are shot by guns, so why don't we blame cars for car accidents? Why don't we blame cars for drunk drivers? Well, for one thing, cars were not designed solely to kill or injure. Cars were designed to travel. Yes, people die in them a lot, and there's no denying that. But we do regulate the hell out of cars. You know, I mean, it used to be that driving drunk was totally okay. It was totally legal. There's nothing wrong with it. But then people started dying all the time because we figured out that, drunk drivers are danger on the road, So once people started dying from it and we realized, oh, drunk driving is not a good thing, we made it illegal. Seatbelts didn't used to exist. And then even after they were invented, they weren't required. They were optional. But once we realized how many people were dying because they weren't wearing a seatbelt, we made it law. Now you have to wear a seatbelt. See where I'm going with this? As soon as we see something that is making people unsafe, we create some law or regulation to put a stop to that, or to at least reduce the problem. Yes, there's still drunk drivers. Yes, there's still a lot of people that don't wear seatbelts, but there's a lot less than there would be if those things were still totally legal. If people could legally drive drunk, how many people would be dying every day on the roads? A lot more than there is right now. So, and there are also this, safety regulations with cars themselves. Car manufacturers have to meet certain requirements before a car can legally be driven on the road. Road conditions have to be a certain way. There's tons and tons and tons and tons of laws and regulations and rules and whatnot that are there to make cars and driving as safe as they can possibly be. And whenever we discover new ways to make it even safer, we make those laws or regulations. We make them a requirement because we can't be trusted, basically, to keep ourselves safe. So we need people to come up with laws and regulations and rules to save us from ourselves, basically, to force us to be responsible. And we need to be doing that with guns, too. Obviously, gun crime is a problem. Obviously, accidental shootings are a problem. Obviously, mass shootings are a problem. So, doing nothing is not going to solve that problem. So we need to say, okay, how can we make our country safer with all these guns here? Nobody's trying to ban guns because we have the right to own them. But the government has to look at this problem and say, okay, they aren't safe. We need to make it safer. We need to reduce this threat to the American public. How do we do that? Well, we do that with gun regulations. We do that with increased background checks. We do it with increased safety requirements. We do it by getting rid of completely unnecessary guns like semi-automatic and automatic weapons. Keeping those out of the hands of untrained people. Even, again, going back to cars. If you want to drive a semi-truck, or if you want to ride a motorcycle or some sort of specialized vehicle, something that's maybe harder to drive than a regular car, you have to have a special license for that. You have to have special training. You have to prove that you know how to drive that special vehicle. It should be the same with semi-automatic weapons. You should have to have additional or special training in order to own them. You should have to have a special license in order to own them or carry them. And you should only be using them when it's necessary. You don't need to be carrying a semi-automatic weapon around with you for protection. That's absurd. If you need to be carrying a gun for protection, if you live in the inner city in some dangerous place or whatever, all you need for that is a handgun. If you insist on having a gun, you don't even really need one. Sometimes you might. There are definitely cases when somebody needs a gun to defend themselves, but it doesn't really happen all that often when you think about it. I don't know a single person who has ever needed a gun in their life, ever. I know a lot of people that carry them for protection, but I don't know anybody who's ever actually had to use one for protection. But Anyway, I mean, I get that some people do need them for protection, but the average American doesn't. So whatever. But anyway, you still just need like a handgun for that. You know, you don't need a fucking AR-15. That's just not necessary. So whatever. Yeah, I mean, if you're into shooting for sport or whatever, and you want semi-automatic weapons because you like them, then fine. But you should have additional training and a special license, and you should only be allowed to use those types of guns in certain situations, like shooting ranges and, you know, shooting at targets, possibly hunting. I don't really see why you need a semi-automatic weapon for hunting, but whatever, you might. So anyway, that is my opinion on the whole gun control thing. Please leave your comments below, like, share, all that fun stuff. Again, I am Tim. This is Random Awesome, and this was my rant of the day. Peace out, bitches.